Well, touch points are times when the child is about to learn something new, and in the process of gathering steam, because learning something new costs the child a certain amount, they regress for several days or maybe a week or something like that. And I've called them touch points because in my own practice, if I touched into the system at that point and told parents regression is a time for learning, then parents didn't worry about it, didn't get uptight and put more pressure on a child at a time when he was going through a lot of pressure from inside. And it began to be a therapeutic sort of opportunity. And so the touch points for feeding, I would hope, would be times when you could prevent feeding problems, when you could hear from the parents how they feel about feeding, what their own experience has been with their own feeding, and give them a chance to unload some of these issues so that you could share them with them, and then they wouldn't be driven by their own past to put pressure on a child when they might have been pressured themselves. And so these touch points for feeding are, I think, particularly important because learning to eat is something the child should learn by himself. Now, in the first year, obviously, he has to be fed, but after that, it's really critical to a child to not only feed himself, but to make choices about what he eats. If you don't give that to a child, you run into problems that you just couldn't dream of. So the touch points, I would say the first one is obvious, deciding whether to breastfeed or to bottle feed. And it's a time when you can share with parents their feelings about getting close to the baby and so forth. Right now, it's a very fraught time for a lot of women because they have to work all day. They don't feel like they dare get that close to a child, or they don't dare let somebody else feed them if they're going to feed them. There's a kind of conflict going on in women right now about breastfeeding that really surprises me, because I would think it would be important to get close to your baby, closer, if you're going to have to leave them with somebody else. But the incidence of breastfeeding has gone down. And when you pin a woman down, she says, it means I'm going to have to leave her too soon. And you say, too soon? Yeah, within the first 8 weeks. That's too soon. But we can get breastfeeding going. You could pump at work, and when you get home and put that baby to breast, it's just so delicious to look down at that baby and have the baby look up at you, and both of you lock onto each other, and you're close again. At that point, women begin to weep, and they say, I can't stand to leave her with anybody else. So they're already going through a kind of grief reaction about having to separate later on. So separation is a big issue today for parents, and it's often worked out in feeding, sleeping, all of the issues that are important in the parent-child interaction. Second one is at about 4.5 months. The baby's visual acuity is about 18 inches, right here where the baby's face would be. Well, all of a sudden at 4.5 months, it enlarges and the world becomes their oyster. And of course, they don't want to eat. They want to look around and listen and gather it all in. And so all of a sudden, they don't want to eat at about 4.5 months. And parents say, oh my God, I have to wean her. And you say, why? Well, she's telling me she doesn't want to eat. Then if you explain it's a touch point and it'll pass in a few days, nurse, if you're nursing in a dark, quiet room, if you want to get food in, do it in a dark, quiet room. and they eat. And so you can get through it that way. The next big touch point is around crawling and creeping, when they want to get going and they don't want to be stopped. When if you sit them in a baby chair, they just want to move and they want to throw everything. And at the point where they want to do this, 7 to 8 months, it's so exciting that they want to start feeding themselves. Any parent worth its salt ought to learn that this becomes very critical to a baby 7 or 8 months, and let them begin to pick up soft bits of food and feed themselves. Then feeding doesn't get to be fraught. The next big step is at about 11 to 12 months, when they won't sit in the high chair or won't sit in anything. And if you don't feed them on their feet, they just don't eat. And if you can let them feed themselves on their feet, then you pass right through it. But that's a touch point. So each of these are really significant touch points.